Translation, Allah replied, I know what you do not know. After this he taught Adam the names of all things. Then he set these before the angels and asked, Tell me the names of these things, if you are right in thinking that the appointment of a vicegerent will cause disorder. Commentary. The nature of man's knowledge is such that he acquires information of different things through their names. Hence it might be said that the sum total of man's knowledge consists of the names of things. To teach Adam the names of all things means, therefore, imparting the knowledge of those things. Us, 43 you, only you, are all-knowing, all-wise. Translation, they replied, Glory be to you. You alone are free from defect. We possess only that much knowledge which you have given us. Indeed, you alone are all-knowing and all-wise. Commentary. It seems that the knowledge of each angel and each genre of angel is confined to its own sphere of competence. The angels appointed to administer, let us say, things relating to air, have full knowledge about this subject, but have no knowledge, say about water, and so on and so forth. Man's range of knowledge, however, is comprehensive. Even if man's information in a particular area may be narrower than that of the angel directly concerned with it, the total range of his knowledge has a comprehensiveness which has not been granted to the angels. Translation. Then Allah said to Adam, Tell them the names of these things. When Adam told them the names of all those things, Allah declared, Did I not tell you that I know those truths about the earth and the heavens which are hidden from you? I know what you disclose and what you hide. Commentary. This demonstration of Adam's capacity was an answer to the first of the doubts the angels had expressed. In this manner, they were made to realize that God had not only bestowed some authority upon man, but had also endowed him with knowledge. Fear of mischief and disorder through man's appointment as vicegerent is only one aspect of the matter. The other aspect is constructive and offsets man's potentiality for spreading mischief. For the wise will not sacrifice a major good for fear of a minor harm. Translation. Then we commanded the angels, Bow yourselves to Adam. All bowed, but Iblis refused to do so. He waxed proud and joined the defiers. Commentary. This signifies that all the angels whose jurisdiction embraces the earth, and that part of the universe in which the earth is situated, were ordered to devote themselves to man's service. Since man had been invested with authority on earth, the angels were told that whenever man wanted to make use of the powers with which he had been invested by God, and which God of his own will had allowed him to use, they should co-operate with him and enable him to do whatever to do, irrespective of right and wrong. This can be understood with reference to the manner in which government employees are required to work. When a sovereign appoints a governor or a magistrate, all government employees under his jurisdiction are duty not. But as soon as the sovereign indicates to those employees that the governor or magistrate should be barred from doing something, the effective authority of the governor or the magistrate comes to an abrupt end. In fact, were the sovereign to issue the order that the governor be dismissed or imprisoned, the same employees who until then had been moving to and fro at his bidding would not feel hesitant in putting hand on him and taking him to prison. God's order to the angels to prostrate themselves before Adam was of a similar nature. It is possible that prostration signifies the fact of their becoming yoked to man's service. At the same time, it is also possible that they were ordered to perform the act of prostration itself as a sign of the envisaged relationship between angels and man. In my view, the latter seems more plausible. Iblis literally means thoroughly disappointed, utterly in despair. In Islamic terminology, the word denotes the jinn who, in defiance of God's command, refused to obey and to yoke himself to the service of Adam and his progeny, and asked God to allow him a term when he might mislead and tempt mankind to evil and error. He is also called al-Shaitan Haigul. In fact, Satan or Eli is not an abstract, impersonal force. Like human beings, he is possessed of a specific personality. Moreover, one should not make the mistake of considering Satan an angel. Elsewhere, the Qur'an itself clearly states that he was a jinn, and jinn, as we know, are an independent species, distinct from the angels. See Qur'an 18:50. These words seem to indicate that in committing disobedience, Iblis was probably not alone. What seems to have been the case is that a section of the jinn was bent upon rebellion, and the name of Iblis is mentioned only because he was their leader and the most noted among them for his rebellion. Another translation of this sentence could be, quote, "And he was of the defiers." If this sense is correct, these words would signify that there was already a party of rebellious and recalcitrant jinn, and that Iblis belonged to that party. In the Quran, the word shayatin denotes these jinn and their offspring. Hence, whenever the context itself does not indicate that the term has been used for human beings who possess satanic attributes, the word Satans should be understood to signify these satanic jinn. Translation: Then we said, O Adam, you and your wife, both dwell in the garden and eat to your heart's content wherefrom you will. But do not go near this tree, otherwise you shall become transgressors. Commentary: This indicates that before man was sent to earth, moreover, for this kind of test, paradise was the best possible place. What God wanted to impress on man was that the only place that befits man's station is paradise, and that if man turns from the course of obedience to God as a result of satanic allurements, he will remain deprived of it in the next life, even as he was deprived of it once before. The only way he can recover his true status and reclaim the lost paradise is by resisting effectively the enemy who is always trying to drive him off the course of obedience to God. The use of the word wrongdoer is highly significant. Wrongdoing consists in withholding someone's rights, and the wrongdoer is one who withholds those rights from their legitimate claimants. Anyone who disobeys God withholds three major rights. The first is what is due to God, for he has the right to be obeyed. Second, there are the rights of all those things which a man employs in disobeying God. The parts of his body, his mental energy, his fellow beings. Those angels who, under divine dispensation, have been appointed to enable him to achieve his aims. Both righteous and unrighteous, the material objects which he employs in his acts of disobedience, all these have a rightful claim upon him to be used in ways that please God. But when he uses them in ways which displease God, he commits wrong against them all. Third, he wrongs his own self, which has the right to be saved from perdition. By inviting punishment from God because of his disobedience, he wrongs his own self as well. It is for these reasons that the word wrong is often used in the Quran for sin, and the word wrongdoer for sinner. Translation: After a time, Satan tempted them with that tree to disobey our command and brought them out of the state they were in, and we decreed, now, go down all of you from here. You are enemies of one another. Henceforth you shall dwell and provide for yourselves on the earth for a specified period. Commentary: This means that Satan is the enemy of man, and vice versa. That Satan is the enemy of man is obvious enough, for he tries to drive him off the course of obedience to God and leads him to perdition. But one might wonder how man could be referred to as the enemy of Satan. The fact is that man's essential humanity makes this enmity incumbent upon him. Man, however, is often deceived by Satan and befriends him owing to the temptations that he holds out to him. This kind of friendship does not mean that the basic, irreconcilable clash of interests between man and Satan has been resolved. It only means that one of the two has defeated and successfully trapped the other. Translation: At that time Adam learnt appropriate words from his Lord and repented, and his Lord accepted his repentance, for he is very relenting and very merciful. Commentary: This means that when Adam became conscious of his act of sin and wanted to return from his state of disobedience to that of obedience, and when he tried to seek remission for his sin from God, he was unable to find the words to use in his prayer to God. In his mercy, God taught him the words with which he could pray. The word tawbah basically denotes to come back, to turn towards someone. Tawbah, on the part of man, signifies that he has given up his attitude of disobedience and has returned to submission and obedience to God. The same word used in respect of God means that he has mercifully turned towards his repentant servant, so that the latter has once more become an object of his compassionate attention. The Qur'an refutes the doctrine that certain consequences necessarily follow from sins, and that man must in all cases bear them. In fact, this is one of the most misleading doctrines to have been invented by human imagination. If it were true, it would mean that a sinner would never have the opportunity to have his repentance accepted. It is a mechanistic view of reward and punishment, and thus prevents and discourages the sinner from trying to improve. The Qur'an, on the contrary, tells man that reward for good actions and punishment for bad ones rests entirely with God. The reward that one receives for good acts is not the natural consequence of those acts. It is rather due to the grace and benevolence of God, and it is entirely up to Him to reward one or not. Likewise, punishment for evil deeds is not a natural and unalterable consequence of man's acts. God has full authority to punish man for his sin, as well as to pardon him. God's grace and mercy, however, are interrelated with his wisdom. Since he is wise, he does not use his power arbitrarily. Hence, whenever God rewards a man for his good acts, he does so because the good was done with purity of intention and for the sake of pleasing God. And if God refuses to accept an act of apparent goodness, he does so because that act had merely the form or appearance of goodness, and was not motivated by the desire to please God. In the same way, God punishes man for those sins which he commits with rebellious boldness, and which whet his appetite for more rather than lead him to repentance. Similarly, in his mercy, God pardons those sins which are followed by genuine repentance and readiness on the part of the sinner to reform himself. There is no need for the criminal to despair of God's grace and mercy, no matter how great a criminal he is. Nor is there any reason for even the most rabid disbeliever to despair, provided he recognizes his error, repents of his disobedience, and is ready to replace his former disobedience with obedience. Translation, we said, now go down, all of you from here. Henceforth there shall come to you guidance from me now and again. Whoever will follow it shall have neither fear nor sorrow. Commentary. The reiteration of this statement is significant. WC have been told above that Adam repented, and that his repentance was accepted by God. This means that the stain of sin was washed away, and therefore no stain remained. On the contrary, God not only accepted Adam's repentance, but also honored him by endowing him with prophethood so that he might be able to direct his children correctly. The repetition of the order to leave paradise and go down to earth is aimed at driving home the point that earth was not created as a place of punishment for man. On the contrary, man was put on earth to serve as God's vicegerent there. It was only to test man, and thereafter to equip him for the performance of God's vicegerency, that man was placed temporarily in paradise. Translation, and whoever will refuse to accept it and defy our revelations, they shall be doomed to the fire, wherein they shall remain forever. Commentary. Ayat is the plural of ayah, which means a sign or token which directs one to something important. In the Quran, this word is used in 4 different senses. Sometimes it denotes a sign or indication. In certain other places, the phenomena of the universe are called the ayat of God, for the reality to which the phenomena point is hidden behind the veil of appearances. At times, the miracles performed by the prophets are also termed ayat, since they show that the prophets were envoys of the sovereign of the universe. Lastly, individual units of the Book of God are also called ayat because they point to the ultimate reality, and because the substantive contents of the Book of God, its phraseology, its style, its inimitable literary excellence are clear tokens of the attributes of the author of the book. The sense in which the word ayah has been used in a particular verse becomes evident from the context of its occurrence. This is a permanent directive from God to mankind which is valid from the beginning of life until the day of judgment. It is this which has been mentioned earlier as God's covenant, cn. 31 above. It is not for man to prescribe the way of life which his fellow human beings should follow. In his double capacity as the subject and vicegerent of God, man is required to follow the way of life prescribed by his Lord. There are only two means of access to this way, either by direct revelation from God or by following one to whom God has revealed guidance. Nothing else can direct man to the way that enjoys God's approval and good pleasure. Resorting to any other means in quest of salvation is not only fundamentally mistaken, but tantamount to rebellion. The story of the creation of Adam and the origin of the human species occurs 7 times in the Qur'an, once in the verses just mentioned. For other references, see 7, 11 a fifth, 15, 26 a fifth, 17, 61 a fifth, 18, 50, 20, 1, 16 a fifth, 38, 71 a fifth. The story also occurs in the Bible in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. A comparative reading of the Qur'anic and biblical versions will enable the perceptive reader to detect the differences between the two. The dialogue between God and the angels at the time of the creation of Adam is also mentioned in the Talmud. This account lacks the spiritual significance underlying the Quranic version. Indeed, the Talmudic version additionally contains the following oddity. When the angels ask why men are being created, God replies that they are being created so that good people may be born among them. God refrains from mentioning the bad people lest the angels disapprove the creation of man. See Paul Lycée Hirschan, Talmudic Miscellany, London, 1880, pp. 294 translation, O children of Israel, just recall to mind my favor, wherewith I blessed you, fulfill your covenant with me, and I shall fulfill my covenant with you. And fear me alone. Commentary. Israel means the slave of God. This was the title conferred on Jacob by God himself. He was the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham. His progeny are styled the children of Israel. Turning to the Quranic text itself, it is noteworthy that the foregoing verses have been in the nature of introductory remarks addressed to all mankind. From the present section up to and including the 14th verses 40 discourse, the reader should be particularly aware of the following purposes. The first purpose of this discourse is to invite those followers of the earlier prophets who still had some element of righteousness and goodness to believe in the truth preached by the Prophet Muhammad's be on him, and to join hands in promoting the mission he championed. In these sections they are told that the Qur'an and the Prophet are bearers of the same message and mission preached by the earlier prophets and scriptures. The earlier communities were entrusted with the truth in order that, as well as following it themselves, they might call others towards it and try to persuade them to follow it. But instead of directing the world in the light of this truth, they themselves failed to follow the divine guidance and sank into degeneracy. Their history and their contemporary religious and moral condition bore out this degeneration. They are also told that God has once again entrusted the same truth to one of his servants and has appointed him to carry out the same mission as that of the earlier prophets and their followers. What the prophet has brought is, therefore, neither new nor foreign, it is their very own, and they are asked to accept it as such. A fresh group of people has now arisen with the same mission they had, but which they failed to carry out. It is clearly their duty to support these people. The second purpose of this discourse is to leave no reasonable justification for the negative Jewish attitude towards Islam, and to expose fully the true state of the religious and moral life of the Jews. This discourse makes it clear that the religion preached by the prophet was the same as that preached by the prophets of Israel. So far as the fundamentals are concerned, nothing in the Qur'an differs from the teachings of the Torah. It is also established that the Jews failed glaringly to follow the guidance entrusted to them, even as they had failed to live up to the position of leadership in which they had been placed. This point is established by reference to events of irrefutable authenticity. Moreover, the way in which the Jews resorted to conspiracies and underhand machinations designed to create doubts and misgivings, the mischievous manner in which they engaged in discussions, the acts of trickery in which they indulged in willful opposition to the truth, and the vile tactics which they employed in order to frustrate the mission of the prophet, were all brought into sharp relief so as to establish that their formal legalistic piety was a sham. What lay behind it was bigotry. Chauvinism and this candid criticism of the Jews had several salutary effects. On the one hand, it made the situation clear to the good elements among the Jews. On the other, it destroyed the religious and moral standing of the Jews among the people of Medina and among the pagans of Arabia as a whole. Moreover, it undermined the morale of the Jews to such an extent that from then on they could not oppose Islam with a firmness born of strong inner conviction. Third, the message addressed in the earlier sections to mankind as a whole is here elucidated with reference to a particular people. The example of the Jews is cited to show the tragic end that overtakes a people when it spurns divine guidance. The reason for choosing the children of Israel as an example is that they alone, out of all the nations, constituted for 4,000 years the continual embodiment of a tragedy from which many lessons could be learnt. The vicissitudes of fortune which visit a people, depending on whether they follow or refrain from following divine guidance, were all conspicuous in the history of this nation. Fourth, this discourse is designed to warn the followers of Muhammad be on him to avoid the same pitfalls as the followers of the earlier prophets. While explaining the requirements of the true faith, it clearly specifies the moral weaknesses, the false concepts of religion, and the numerous errors in religious belief and practice which had made inroads among the Jews. The purpose is to enable Muslims to see their true path clearly and to avoid false ones. While studying the Quranic criticism of the Jews and Christians, Muslims should remember the tradition from the Prophet in which he warned them that they would so closely follow the ways of the earlier religious communities that if the latter had entered a lizard's burrow, so would the Muslims. The Prophet was asked, "Do you mean the Christians and Jews, O Messenger of God?" The Prophet replied, "Who else?" Surah Al-Baqarah, Itisam, 14, Muslim, Ilm, 6.